I never expected that a blizzard and a hotel booking error would dismantle the life I had so carefully constructed. My world was a grid of straight lines and predictable patterns, a quiet sanctuary built from routine and the muted gray of solitude. I was a graphic designer, and my job was to create order from chaos, to align elements on a page until they achieved a state of perfect, silent harmony. My life mirrored my work. Wake up at 6:30. Coffee, black. Walk to the office, same route. Work until 6. Walk home. Dinner for 1. It was a fortress, and I was its sole, lonely occupant. The one chaotic element, the one variable I could never quite account for, was Julian. Julian was a senior architect at the firm, a man who seemed to have been carved from warmer, more solid materials than the rest of us. He was tall, with shoulders that seemed built to carry more than just the weight of his laptop bag, and his presence filled a room without him ever raising his voice. His voice was the first thing I had noticed about him, a low, calm rumble that could cut through the office chatter like a cello note in a room full of violins. It was a sound that settled deep in my bones, a quiet vibration that promised stability and strength. He was my boss, at least for the duration of the Northgate Tower project. This was the barrier, the thick, unbreachable wall between my quiet admiration and any kind of reality. He was a figure in a museum exhibit, roped off and perfectly lit, a masterpiece of casual confidence and easy smiles that I could only observe from a safe, respectful distance. To him, I was Leo, the designer who turned his complex architectural renderings into sleek presentation booklets. I was reliable. I was quiet. I was a pair of hands and a good eye for kerning. I was utterly and completely invisible in any other capacity. And so, I collected details about him the way a naturalist collects specimens. I knew the scent of his cologne was a subtle mix of sandalwood and something clean, like fresh rain on pavement. It lingered in the conference room long after he had left, a ghost of his presence that I would secretly breathe in. I knew he took his coffee with 1 sugar, stirred exactly 3 times. I knew the way the muscles in his jaw would tense when he was concentrating, and how a small crease would appear between his brows. I cataloged the way his dark hair curled just slightly at his temples when the air was humid, the way he would run a hand through it when he was frustrated, leaving it perfectly disheveled. These observations were my secret hoard of treasures, locked away in the vault of my mind. They were dangerous because they fed a yearning that had no place in my orderly world. He was, by all accounts, straight. He spoke of a sister, a niece, but never a partner, yet the assumption hung in the air like a settled fact, an unspoken rule of the universe. Men like Julian, men who moved with that kind of effortless grace and commanded respect so easily, they existed in a different world, one populated by confident women with bright smiles and easy laughter. They did not exist for men like me, men who lived behind walls of their own making. So I kept my distance, maintained my professional veneer, and let the ache of it all become just another part of my quiet routine. The disruption came on a Tuesday in February. We were due in a city 3 hours north for the final presentation to the Northgate developers. It was the culmination of 6 months of work, and the pressure was immense. A snowstorm had been forecasted, a vague threat on the horizon, but the firm decided we should travel the day before to be safe. Just me and Julian. The thought of it, a 3-hour drive and an overnight stay, sent a low hum of anxiety and a terrifying flicker of excitement through my carefully managed systems. The drive itself was tense, but manageable. The snow began as a gentle flurry, a picturesque dusting on the pines that lined the highway. We spoke about the project, Julian's voice a steady counterpoint to the rhythmic thump of the windshield wipers. I kept my answers concise, my gaze fixed on the road ahead, intensely aware of him in the passenger seat. His warmth seemed to radiate across the console, a tangible presence in the small, enclosed space of the car. I could smell that sandalwood scent, now mingled with the cold, clean air from the vents, and it was doing unsettling things to my concentration. By the time we reached the hotel, the gentle flurry had escalated into a thick, swirling curtain of white. The wind howled, and the world outside the car had been reduced to a frantic, blurry chaos. It was the perfect external manifestation of my internal state. We checked in, stomping snow from our boots in the lobby, and that was when the first crack appeared in the foundation of my orderly world. I'm so sorry, Mr. Vance, the receptionist said, her face a mask of practiced apology. We seem to have had a system error. Your two reserved rooms have been merged into a single booking, a king suite. And with the storm, we are completely, 100% full. Every hotel in the city is. I felt the blood drain from my face. A single booking, a king suite. The words echoed in the sudden, ringing silence of my mind. I looked at Julian, expecting to see frustration, annoyance. Instead, his expression was one of weary resignation. He just ran a hand through his snow-dampened hair, the gesture I knew so well. It's fine, he said, his voice calm, directed at the flustered receptionist, but somehow also at my own rising panic. We'll take it. It's just for one night. He turned to me, a small, apologetic smile on his lips. You okay with that, Leo? I can take the couch if there is 1 inch. I could only nod, my throat too tight to form words. Okay with it. The question was absurd. I was suspended somewhere between abject terror and a dizzying, treacherous hope. The storm had not just trapped us in this city. It had breached my fortress. It had taken the man from the museum exhibit and locked him in the same room with me for the night. The carefully drawn lines of my world had just been irrevocably blurred. The room was large, impersonally luxurious, and dominated by a single, enormous king-sized bed. It sat in the center of the space like a monument to my impending doom. A small sofa was tucked into a corner by the window, but it looked stiff and unforgiving. The air was thick with a tense, unspoken awkwardness. We moved around each other with a strange, stilted choreography, placing our bags down, taking off our coats, each of us hyper-aware of the other's proximity in the suddenly too small space. The silence was broken only by the sound of the wind rattling the window pane. I'll call down for some room service, Julian said, breaking the quiet. No way we're going out in that. His voice was still calm, but I could see the tightness in his shoulders. He was trying to normalize this, to smooth over the jagged edges of the situation with practicality. I was grateful for it, even as my own heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I stood by the window, watching the snow obliterate the world outside. It was a blank canvas, a total whiteout. It felt as if the city, the firm, our professional roles, everything had been temporarily erased, leaving only the two of us in this room, suspended in time and space. The distance I had so carefully maintained between us had collapsed from miles to mere feet. My senses were on high alert, cataloging everything with a feverish intensity. I could hear the soft rustle of his clothes as he shrugged off his jacket, the quiet click of the phone receiver being lifted. His scent, that damnable sandalwood and rain, was slowly beginning to permeate the sterile hotel air, making the room feel less like a neutral space and more like his space. I felt like an intruder in my own panic attack. He ordered burgers and fries, a simple, grounding meal. While we waited, he took the couch. This will be fine for me, he said, gesturing to the small sofa. You take the bed. It was not a question. It was a statement of quiet authority, the boss taking charge, but it was laced with a consideration that made my stomach twist. He was trying to make me comfortable, and the kindness of it was almost worse than the awkwardness. You don't have to do that, I managed to say, my voice sounding thin and reedy. It's big enough. The bed, I mean. We can. It's fine. The words felt foolish and clumsy as they left my mouth. Why had I said that? It was a moment of weakness, a crack in my composure, a subconscious refusal to let him be a gentleman on a lumpy couch while I slept in luxury. He looked at me, his gaze steady and unreadable. For a long moment, he just watched me, and I felt as if he could see right through the carefully constructed facade to the frantic mess inside. We'll see, was all he said, turning his attention to the television. He flicked it on, and the low murmur of a news report about the storm filled the room, a welcome buffer against the suffocating silence. When the food arrived, we ate sitting on the floor, using the coffee table as our makeshift dining surface. It felt strangely intimate, almost domestic. We were two colleagues, stranded by a storm, sharing a meal. But my mind was screaming that we were so much more, or that I wanted us to be. Every time his hand brushed mine as we both reached for the ketchup, a jolt of electricity shot up my arm. I tried to focus on my burger, on the drone of the television, on anything other than the man sitting cross-legged just a few feet away from me. I became acutely aware of the sounds of him existing. The way he chewed thoughtfully, the soft sigh he let out after a long drink of water, the low rumble of his voice when he commented on the weather report. These were the mundane details of life. Yet coming from him, they felt profound, like clues to a mystery I was desperate to solve. I was watching a private screening of the Julian I never got to see at the office. The unguarded version, the man with his tie loosened and his sleeves rolled up to his elbows, revealing strong forearms dusted with dark hair. After we ate, a comfortable quiet settled between us. The initial tension had softened, worn down by the simple act of sharing food and the overwhelming power of the storm outside. We both ended up looking out the window, standing side by side, watching the hypnotic dance of the snowflakes in the lamplight. "I've never seen it come down this hard," he said, his voice quiet, almost a whisper. He was so close I could feel the warmth radiating from his body, a stark contrast to the cold seeping from the window pane against my fingers. "Me neither," I replied, my voice equally soft. My entire being was focused on the few inches of empty space between our shoulders. It felt like a supercharged magnetic field, pulling me in. I fought the urge to lean into it, to close the gap. "This project," he started, his gaze still fixed on the storm. "It's a lot. The partners have a lot riding on it," he paused, and for the first time, I heard a note of something other than calm confidence in his voice. It was weariness, vulnerability. "My last big project, it didn't go through. The client pulled out at the last minute. Felt like a personal failure." He turned his head to look at me then, and his eyes, a deep, thoughtful brown, held mine. In that moment, the museum glass between us shattered. He was not a masterpiece to be admired from afar. He was a person, with pressures and insecurities and the memory of failure. It was a glimpse behind the curtain, a crack in his self-assured facade, and it did something devastating to my heart. It made him real. "It wasn't your fault," I heard myself say, the words coming out with more conviction than I knew I possessed. "The designs were incredible. I worked on the final renderings. They were brilliant." A small, genuine smile touched his lips. It transformed his face, softening the handsome lines and making him look younger. "Thanks, Leo. I appreciate that." He held my gaze for a second longer than was professionally necessary, a silent acknowledgement passing between us. The air grew thick and charged again, but this time it was different. It wasn't just awkwardness. It was something else, something fragile and nascent and terrifyingly real. He was the one who broke the contact, turning back to the window. "Well," he said, his voice returning to its more practical tone. "Guess we should probably try to get some sleep. Big day tomorrow, assuming we can even get to the client's office." The spell was broken. We went through the quiet rituals of preparing for bed. I changed in the bathroom, my hands trembling as I brushed my teeth. When I came out, he had already dimmed the lights, leaving only one small lamp on by the bed, casting long shadows across the room. He had taken one of the pillows and a blanket and was arranging them on the ridiculously small couch. "Julian, don't," I said, the words feeling bolder in the semi-darkness. "That's insane. You won't sleep a wink. The bed is huge. Please." He hesitated, standing with the pillow in his hand, a silhouette against the dim light. I could see the conflict in his posture. He was weighing propriety against practicality, kindness against the unspoken tension that simmered between us. "Are you sure?" His voice was low, a rumbling question in the quiet room. "I'm sure," I said, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "It's just sleeping. It's fine." He let out a slow breath and nodded, placing the pillow back on the bed. He walked around to the other side, and the mattress dipped as he sat down. I got into my side, my body rigid, pulling the covers up to my chin like a shield. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, every nerve ending tingling with a heightened awareness of him. I could hear him breathing, a slow, steady rhythm in the darkness. I could feel the subtle shift of the mattress as he settled in beside me. The space between us felt both vast and infinitesimal. It was a chasm of unspoken things, of professional boundaries and personal fears. Yet it was also just a few inches of cool cotton sheet. I lay perfectly still, my muscles aching with the effort of not moving, of not accidentally brushing against him. The room was dark, the only light a faint, ghostly glow from the snow-covered world outside the window. The silence was absolute, save for the sound of our breathing and the frantic drumming of my own pulse in my ears. Time seemed to stretch and warp. Minutes felt like hours. I was convinced he was asleep, his breathing deep and even, while I was trapped in a state of hypervigilance. My mind raced, replaying every moment of the day, every glance, every word. His confession of a past failure, his small smile, the way he had looked at me by the window. It was a dangerous cocktail of hope and anxiety, and it was intoxicating. I thought about the walls I had built around myself, the orderly life I had curated. They had kept me safe, but they had also kept me utterly alone. Tonight, the storm had knocked them down without my permission. And here, in the rubble, lying next to the one person I had ever truly wanted, I was more terrified and more alive than I had ever been. I must have drifted off at some point, lulled into a shallow, restless sleep by the sheer force of emotional exhaustion. But I woke with a start, my body still tense. The room was darker now, the glow from outside having faded. I did not know what had woken me. I lay there, listening, and then I heard it. A soft sound from Julian's side of the bed. It was not a snore, but a quiet, hitched breath, as if he were in the grip of a bad dream. Another small, distressed sound escaped him. Instinct, pure and simple, took over. Before I could think, before my anxious mind could list all the reasons why I should not, I rolled onto my side to face him. In the deep shadows, I could just make out his form, his back mostly to me. "Julian," I whispered, my voice barely a thread of sound. "Are you okay?" He did not answer, but his breathing was still uneven. The vast space between us suddenly felt wrong, like a void that needed to be filled. I shifted closer, the movement feeling monumental in the stillness of the room. I could feel the heat of his body now, a comforting, solid warmth in the cool air. I hesitated for a heart-stopping moment, my hand hovering in the space between us. Then, I rested it gently on his shoulder. His skin was warm through the thin fabric of his t-shirt. Under my palm, I felt his muscles tense for a fraction of a second, and then, impossibly, they relaxed. He let out a long, slow breath, and the tension seemed to drain out of him. He shifted slightly, not away from me, but into the touch, a subtle, almost imperceptible movement that sent a shockwave through my entire system. He was not asleep. My heart stopped. My breath caught in my throat. I should have pulled my hand away, retreated to my side of the bed, pretended I had been asleep myself. But I could not. My fingers stayed right where they were, a silent anchor on his shoulder. The warmth of his skin seemed to travel up my arm, spreading through my chest, a slow-burning fire. He rolled slowly, deliberately, onto his back, and then turned his head to face me. I could not see his expression clearly in the profound darkness, but I could feel his gaze on me. The air crackled. The silence was no longer empty. It was filled with a question. My hand was still on his shoulder, a silent confession. His hand came up, slow and tentative, and his fingers brushed against mine. It was not an accidental touch. It was a deliberate, questioning gesture. He traced the line of my knuckles, his touch light as a whisper, and every point of contact sent a fresh jolt through me. My carefully ordered world was not just blurring now. It was dissolving completely, melting away in the heat that was building between us. This was the point of no return. I knew it. This was the moment where I could either retreat back behind my walls or step into the terrifying, unknown chaos he represented. He moved his hand from mine, and for a terrifying second, I thought he was pulling away. But instead, he cupped my jaw, his thumb stroking softly against my cheek. The gesture was so tender, so impossibly gentle, it made my eyes burn. No one had ever touched me with such care. He leaned in, his movement slow, giving me every opportunity to pull away. I did not. I met him halfway, closing the final distance between us. His lips met mine, and the world fell away. The kiss was not demanding or passionate. It was soft, hesitant, a question asked in a language my body understood far better than my mind. It was a search for reassurance, a tentative exploration. His lips were warm and soft, and I could taste the faint, lingering trace of coffee from hours before. I felt a shudder go through him, or maybe it was me. It was impossible to tell where one of us ended and the other began. It was a moment of pure, terrifying, beautiful connection. The fortress I had spent years building had been reduced to dust by a single touch, A single kiss in the dark of a snowbound hotel room. My orderly life was over. I could feel the old foundations crumbling, and in their place, something new and fragile and overwhelmingly real was beginning to grow. I kissed him back, pouring every bit of my secret, long-held yearning into the gesture, and I felt him respond, his hand tightening on my jaw, pulling me closer. The chaos had arrived, and for the first time in my life, I was not afraid. I was welcoming it. The morning came too soon, a cold, gray light filtering through a gap in the heavy curtains. It felt harsh and intrusive after the soft, encompassing darkness of the night. I woke up alone in the massive bed, the space beside me cool and empty. For a disorienting moment, I thought I had dreamed it all. The storm, the shared room, the impossible, tender kiss. But the faint scent of his sandalwood cologne on the pillow next to mine was undeniable proof. It had been real. And he was gone. Panic, cold and sharp, seized me. I sat bolt upright, my heart hammering against my ribs. I looked around the room. His suitcase was still by the door, his jacket slung over a chair. Then I heard the faint sound of the shower running in the bathroom. He had not left. He was just avoiding me. The thought was a punch to the gut. The beautiful, fragile thing that had bloomed in the darkness now seemed grotesque and foolish in the stark light of day. My anxiety, a beast I usually kept caged, was now roaring, its claws tearing at the edges of my sanity. I had misread everything. It had been a mistake. A moment of weakness brought on by proximity and the strange, suspended reality of the storm. He regretted it. Of course, he regretted it. I scrambled out of bed, my movements clumsy and frantic. I had to fix this. I had to put the walls back up, faster and stronger than before. I had to pretend it never happened, for the sake of my job, for the sake of my own fragile dignity. By the time the shower turned off, I was dressed, my hair combed, my face a carefully constructed mask of professional neutrality. I was Leo the graphic designer again, not the man who had melted under his boss's touch. When Julian emerged from the bathroom, a cloud of steam billowing out behind him, the tension in the room was so thick I could barely breathe. He had a towel slung low on his hips, and droplets of water clung to his chest and shoulders. He was magnificent, and the sight of him was a fresh wave of pain. He would not look at me. His gaze was fixed on his suitcase as he pulled out fresh clothes. "Morning," he muttered, his voice rough. It was not the calm, rumbling tone from yesterday. It was strained, clipped. "Morning," I replied, my own voice sounding hollow and distant. We were strangers again, two colleagues forced into an awkward situation. The intimacy of the night before might as well have happened in another lifetime, to two different people. The silence that followed was excruciating. It was a living thing, a heavy, suffocating presence in the room. He dressed quickly, his movements efficient and detached. He kept his back to me the entire time. Every second that passed was another confirmation of my fears. He was ashamed. He was disgusted. I had ruined everything. I had crossed a line that should never have been crossed, and now I had made our professional relationship, the only relationship we had, impossible. The ache in my chest was a physical weight, making it hard to draw a full breath. I busied myself with packing my own bag, my hands shaking so badly I could barely zip it closed. I focused on the task, on the simple mechanics of folding clothes and arranging toiletries. Order. I needed order. I could control this, at least. I could put my things back in their proper place, even if my entire world had been thrown into disarray. "The snow has stopped," he said, his voice coming from the window. "Looks like they're clearing the main roads." He still was not looking at me. He was reporting facts, keeping the conversation sterile and safe. "Good," I said. "We should be able to make the presentation." "Yeah." The distance between us was no longer just a few feet of hotel carpet. It was a vast, icy chasm. I felt a desperate urge to say something, to apologize, to explain, to take it all back. But what could I say? Sorry for wanting you so much I couldn't stop myself. Sorry for thinking, for one insane moment, that you might have wanted me too. The words died in my throat, choked by shame and fear. So I said nothing. We finished packing in that terrible, loaded silence. The drive back was even worse than the awkwardness in the hotel room. The presentation had gone surprisingly well, our professional masks sliding perfectly into place the moment we stepped into the client's office. We were a seamless team, polished and competent. But the second we were back in the car, the suffocating tension returned, 10 times stronger. The silence was absolute, broken only by the sound of the tires on the wet pavement. My anxiety spiral was in full flight. I replayed the kiss over and over in my mind, dissecting it, analyzing it, searching for the moment I had gotten it so wrong. Had I been too forward? Had he just been trying to comfort me after a nightmare, and I had taken it as something more? The more I thought, the more convinced I became that I was the sole author of this disaster. He had been kind, and I had been predatory. The thought made me feel sick with self-loathing. I stared out the passenger window, watching the slushy, gray landscape slide by, a perfect reflection of my mood. I was already composing my resignation letter in my head. There was no way I could go back to the office, to see him every day, to live with the memory of this humiliation. I had taken my one safe space, my orderly life, and I had torched it. We were less than an hour from home when he finally broke the silence. He pulled the car over onto the shoulder of a quiet stretch of highway and turned off the engine. The sudden quiet was deafening. "Leo," he said, his voice low and serious. He turned to face me, and for the first time since that moment in the dark, he met my eyes. His expression was not angry or disgusted. It was pained, and something else I could not quite decipher. Anxious. My heart began to pound. This was it. The talk. The let's pretend this never happened for the sake of the firm speech. The gentle but firm rejection. I braced myself for the impact. "We need to talk about last night," he said. I just nodded, unable to speak. I stared at my hands, clenched tightly in my lap. He took a deep breath, the sound filling the small space. "I am so sorry," he began, and my stomach plummeted. "Here it comes. I'm sorry for how I acted this morning. I panicked. I didn't handle it well at all." I looked up, confused. That was not what I had expected. "You panicked?" "Yeah," he said, a wry, self-deprecating smile touching his lips for a second. "I'm not as calm and collected as I look." Apparently, he ran a hand through his hair, the familiar gesture of frustration. "Leo, last night, that wasn't a mistake. Not for me." The world tilted on its axis. I stared at him, trying to process his words. They did not compute. They did not fit the narrative of shame and regret that I had spent the last 8 hours constructing in my head. "I've wanted to do that for a very long time," he continued, his voice dropping even lower, filled with a vulnerability that mirrored what I'd heard by the window the night before. "Longer than is probably appropriate for a boss to feel about someone on his team. I've spent months telling myself it was impossible, that I was imagining things, that you were unavailable. Unavailable." I whispered. "Why would you think that? You're just so self-contained," he explained, searching for the words. "You have this quiet, orderly world around you, and I never felt like there was a way in. I figured you had someone, or that you just weren't interested. And I couldn't risk making you uncomfortable at work. I couldn't risk losing, well, even just having you on my team." Every word he spoke was a careful, systematic dismantling of my fear. He was not rejecting me. He was confessing. He was laying his own insecurities bare, and they looked startlingly similar to my own. The museum masterpiece was not just real, he was just as terrified as I was. "This morning," he went on, his gaze intense, "I woke up and you were there, and it was everything I'd been imagining. And it scared the hell out of me, because it was real, and suddenly all the professional lines and the what-ifs came crashing down. So I did what I always do when I'm scared. I put up a wall. I retreated. And that was unfair to you. I'm so sorry." Relief washed over me, so potent and overwhelming it felt like I might drown in it. The weight in my chest dissolved, replaced by a giddy, incredulous lightness. "I thought you regretted it," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I thought I had ruined everything. I was going to quit my job." His eyes widened in alarm. "No, Leo, God, no. That's the last thing I would ever want." He reached across the console, his hand covering mine. His touch was warm and firm and real. It was not a dream. I was the one who ruined it. Or I almost did. "You didn't," I said, my voice shaking slightly. I felt the same way. For a long time. I just assumed you were straight. That I was completely invisible to you except as a designer." A slow, genuine smile spread across his face, the same one I had seen in the hotel room. It reached his eyes, crinkling the corners. "Invisible? Leo, I see everything. I see the way you organize your desk, So everything is at a perfect 90-degree angle. I see the way you bite your lip when you're concentrating. I see the way you look at me when you think I'm not paying attention. A blush crept up my neck, hot and fierce. He saw me. All this time, while I had been quietly observing him from my fortress, he had been observing me right back. So, he said, his thumb stroking over my knuckles. Just to be clear, you're not quitting. I laughed, a real, unburdened sound. No, I'm not quitting. And you don't regret last night. Not for a second, I said, my voice full of a confidence I did not know I possessed. Good, he breathed, his smile widening. He leaned across the console, just as he had in the dark of the hotel room. But this time there was no hesitation, no uncertainty. This time, his kiss was not a question. It was an answer. It was sure and deep and full of all the words we had not been able to say. It tasted of relief and apology and the promise of a new beginning. It felt like coming home. Navigating the new dynamic was a delicate dance. At the office, we slipped back into our old roles. He was Julian, the brilliant senior architect. I was Leo, the reliable graphic designer. We exchanged polite, professional emails and discussed project timelines in conference rooms. But now, underneath the surface of it all, there was a secret, shimmering current of electricity. A shared glance across the room held a world of meaning. A brief, accidental brush of our hands as he passed me a document was enough to send a jolt through my entire body. It was our secret, a fragile, precious thing we were protecting from the harsh light of the corporate world. But outside the office, the walls came down completely. Our first real date was 2 days after the trip. He took me to a small, quiet Italian restaurant tucked away on a side street I had never noticed before. He wore a soft gray sweater that made his eyes look even warmer, and he spent the entire evening just looking at me. He asked me questions about my life, my family, my ridiculous obsession with collecting vintage design manuals. He listened with an intensity that made me feel like I was the most fascinating person in the world. I learned things about him, too. I learned that his calm demeanor was a skill he had cultivated to deal with a chaotic family upbringing. I learned he had a surprisingly goofy laugh that he tried to hide behind his hand. I learned he was just as prone to overthinking things as I was, a revelation that made me feel an even deeper connection to him. He was not a perfect, untouchable ideal. He was just a man, full of contradictions and vulnerabilities, and I was falling for him completely. We started spending our evenings together, our weekends. My quiet, orderly apartment, once a fortress of solitude, was now filled with the sound of his low laughter and the scent of his cologne mingling with the smell of the coffee we brewed together in the mornings. He would watch me work on my personal design projects, his chin resting on my shoulder, his warm breath on my neck. I would watch him sketch in his notebook, his brow furrowed in concentration, and feel a sense of profound peace settle over me. The chaos he had brought into my life was not destructive. It was creative. It was the beautiful, unpredictable mess of connection, of sharing a life with someone. He did not shatter my world. He expanded it, adding color and warmth and texture to my muted, grayscale existence. One rainy Saturday afternoon, we were curled up on my sofa, a documentary about brutalist architecture playing softly on the television. He was half asleep, his head in my lap, his heavy warmth a comforting anchor. I was running my fingers through his hair, marveling at the simple, unbelievable fact that this was my life now. He shifted, looking up at me through his eyelashes, a sleepy, contented smile on his face. You know, he murmured, his voice thick with sleep, if that hotel receptionist ever knew she was responsible for all this, she'd probably ask for a commission. I laughed, the sound soft in the quiet room. We should send her a thank you card. Maybe a fruit basket. A very large fruit basket, he agreed, his smile widening. He reached up and traced my jawline with his thumb, the same gesture he had made in the darkness of that hotel room. You okay with this, Leo? He asked, his voice a low, serious rumble, echoing his question from that night. Are you sure? But this time, the question was not about sharing a bed. It was about sharing a life. It was about all of it, the risk, the vulnerability, the terrifying, wonderful reality of us. I leaned down and kissed him, a slow, soft kiss full of all the certainty in the world. I thought about the man I had been just a few weeks ago, the one who lived behind walls, admiring a masterpiece from a safe distance. I had been so afraid of letting anyone in, so terrified of the chaos of emotion. I had believed that safety lay in solitude and order. But I had been wrong. True safety was not the absence of risk. It was finding the one person who made you feel safe enough to take it. It was finding the person who made the chaos feel like coming home. I'm sure, I whispered against his lips. I've never been more sure of anything.